Hey, I'm really excited today. We have Kent Nutrition and Native Dog Food representative Amy Nichols with us, as well as the doctor that does a lot of their nutritional work in the labs there at Kent Nutrition. Really excited to dig into their brains, but just more than that, hear what they have going on. I'm sure, Amy, that I have completely screwed up what your title is because you keep getting promoted. I think it's like now your title's something like fourth person of the Godhead or something like that. Is that right?
No, I am just a lowly sales rep. I cover. I'm the territory sales
Uh-oh.
manager for the great state of Maine, a tiny little sliver of New Hampshire from North Conway down to Hampton Falls, and I have the Canadian Maritimes, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince
All
Edward
right.
Island. That's my official
And you've
title.
had to put up with me for what, 4 years now?
4 years ago,
Yeah.
yep, 4 years ago, I sought you out after I heard you on a
Yeah.
podcast.
And now we're doing a podcast, which is kind of cool.
And here we are in your own podcast. You're not even a guest today. You're
Yeah,
you're
and
it.
I'm super excited about Dr. Randall being with us, and I'm not going to butcher his last name, so I'm going to let you introduce him, and then we'll just dive in.
So Dr. Rob came to us a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, 3 years ago now.
Four.
Um, oh, really? Sorry, it was around COVID,
That's
which
okay.
was like a
Yeah,
decade long, so
yeah,
it's hard to remember.
yeah. COVID. I guess if you subtract COVID, it's about 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So he came to us. He has an extensive background in equine nutrition, but don't let that fool you. I'll let him give all of his own accolades, but basically, the poor man had tried to retire, and a headhunter came out and said, Kent wants you. And he was like, I mean, sure, why not? Like, why would I retire when Kent wants me? So he came on as our director of research and nutrition, which is fantastic. He brings a lot, I think, to our team. He's an excellent public speaker. He's engaging. People connect with him. So, from a salesperson perspective, he's just a great person to have on our team. But I'll let him give his whole background because it is fascinating.
And there's pressure now after that buildup, Amy. Golly. Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your time and your audience with us. I greatly appreciate it. And my, as Amy mentioned, my background is primarily horse, particularly performance-oriented horses, and but I have a real love and passion for dogs, particularly working dogs that work for a living. Uh, Ours are more stock dog oriented, is where my background is with dogs. And then, of course, hunting dogs also there where we live in the Midwest with native prairie, ground, and pheasant. A lot of hunting dog interest and activity. But I've always had a fascination with the mushing community because those dogs, it's just it's just dumbfounding. I mean, physiologically, it
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
nuts. You may or may not know a guy by the name of Dr. Mike Davis. He did a lot of research up in the Iditarod during sled dog races up there. And Mike's a great guy. You either love him or hate him. There's not a lot of gray area with Mike.
Oklahoma State University, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. But one thing about him, he is a smart son of a gun. One of the smartest guys walking. Just an amazing guy. And he and I both share a love for bourbon, and that's how we always get along. Um, but he told me one time about the lactic acid levels. When you exercise, you build lactic acid levels up as a product of what they call anaerobic
Hmm.
exercise. In other words, higher intensity type work generates lactic acid. And he says the lactic acid in these sled dogs would kill a normal person or most other
Hmm.
animals, just the lactic acid level that runs through them during these peak levels of work, which is, he still scratches his head at that phenomena about how these dogs can work at that level and utilize that level of lactic acid. So, just as a physiological species and to satisfy my nerdy view of the world from a nutritional physiology perspective, they're just amazing and fascinating to me. So, that's that's how I've kind of waded more over into the dog side of the equation.
Yeah,
But I, academia and industry, and as Amy said, I was kind of doing my own thing, and it made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So, plus, it's just a great group of
that's
people,
awesome.
a great company. They're doing things for the right reason. And at this stage in my career, I don't have to pretend that I enjoy where I'm
That's
working.
awesome.
I get up in the morning and say I get to go to work instead I have to go to work. So that's a good deal.
Speaking of lactic acid building up in your muscles, are you going to be able to keep up with Amy while you're here in the state?
Well, I just sit in a scooter, one of those motorized scooters, and then I'm good. Otherwise,
I just
yeah,
I give him a whoopie pie,
yeah,
sugar him up.
yeah. She throws me a whoopie pie occasionally,
I
and
think it's part of the
no,
I think it's part of the new
yeah,
Trump energy strategy is harnessing Amy's power
yeah,
somehow, and
yeah. She'd drive a lot of the Northeast for sure. Yeah,
I
yeah,
got a lot of ideas and a lot of energy.
yeah,
Don't let me run too free.
yeah,
so I've got a lot of questions for you, and I'm actually glad you brought up Mike Davis, the DVM over at Oklahoma. He's I think 25 years now. He's been working in conjunction with the Iditarod studying, and so not only as a
yeah,
musher that does distance, but also I'm a biology teacher, and we do an Iditarod
yeah.
module with my
Oh,
students
cool.
every year, and a big part of that module is understanding how these extreme athletes, how they do what they do,
Yeah,
and why they are the absolute greatest athletes in the world. But we'll get into that in a minute. Let's back up a little bit and let's talk about what do you what are your interests outside of work with animals? Do you have horses? Have you had horses or
yeah, yeah. I've had horses or an interest in horses. My family's been involved in horses all their lives. My uncle, my grandfather. Um, my grandfather had a really neat background. My uncle was a thoroughbred owner trainer for 50 some years, but my grandfather, this is before both your and Amy's time, so you may not even recognize, like, but there used to be television programs on Lone Ranger,
Mhm.
Flicka, Black Beauty, those types. Well, my grandfather was one of the guys that would train those horses in Hollywood to do these things on cue, whether it's rearing up or sitting down or playing dead. So he had a fascinating background. And then my wife and I, she's maybe one of the best people on the back of a horse that you'll see from a rider standpoint. Just such a wonderful rider and sits a horse amazingly well. And there for a while, we do a little ranch versatility type stuff that we enjoyed doing, and then I had a stint as a packer and a guide out
Mm,
in Idaho for a while using mules and horses, which
that
was
sounds amazing.
awesome. It was, yeah, you really developed a profound appreciation for your ancestors when you lived in a wall tent for, I don't know, from about end of May to the end of November. Lived in a wall tent up about 6, 7,000 feet, and in a wilderness area. Of course, there's no electric, no motorized anything, and so really developed appreciation. And I like to do things with animals from a job
Yes,
perspective, right?
yes,
I admire horses that you go in the arena and compete, and that's great. But I give me a job if we're moving cattle from point A to point B, or I'm riding a fence line, or I'm packing a string of mules, or something. So I like to interact with them that way, Jonathan, as opposed to maybe just getting in an arena and training them. Although you still want a really well trained, well broke horse. Don't get me wrong.
yeah, yeah,
But I like to do a
right.
job.
And it's the working animal. I love sled dogs, but it's the working animal in general that I just am fascinated with. My education is in wildlife biology, and I studied conservation management for a while. I did a couple state projects, whitetail deer winter survivability, and the Canis latrans variant, our local coyote hybrid population that we have up here in the
Huh,
Northeast. I did
interesting.
some study
Yeah.
on that as well, but I just love working animals. I grew up around horses in the South. My dad was a traveling preacher, and most of the pastors that we would go to visit had horses. And what we would do during the day is we'd ride horses, and my dad would preach at night, and we'd all walk into church, stiff and bow-legged from riding all day. And so
Yeah.
I don't consider myself a horseman. I know enough about them to ride well, and I know enough about them to respect them. Um, I,
Yes.
I, I have a fear slash respect for horses, because I know with that power and strength that they have, what they're capable of. And luckily, being the guest, I always got put on the tamest horse. And
Yeah.
I can ride well. But that all said, horses, and then getting into sled dogs, the second, my adult life. And then if I ever pick up another hobby, I'm really crazy interested about falconry. I've read everything to
Oh
get my
wow.
hands
Yeah.
on it. I just love seeing humans and animals work together to accomplish a
Yeah.
goal. It's pretty neat. So
Yeah.
mules, tell me. I mean, obviously, maybe not everyone knows this. Mules are a hybrid; they're a cross between a donkey and a horse. But why are they so ideally suited for that kind of pack work?
You know, they're incredibly efficient from a nutritional standpoint, right? So when you got a pack string up in the mountains, and the only way you bring any type of concentrate in, as in addition to what they can graze up there, is by a bush plane, right? Well, that gets to be pretty expensive feed in a hurry, right? So it's great to have mules that can maintain condition, and they're much more efficient on a little bit less feed. Plus, they also mules are interesting. They're really fascinating. Their feet are much tougher, and so you don't have to invest the time and energy into shoeing them in that country. And then, they're also just kind of physically more durable than a horse as well. People always associate mules with being stubborn, and that's the one thing I think about a mule. They're not going to go to a situation that's going to feel like they're going to hurt themselves, or so sometimes you get into a situation where they're like, okay, this we've had enough now, and you deal with that,
Mm,
right? So you address that issue. I think one of the best descriptors of a mule, from a guy who probably understood the horses as well as anybody. Somebody asked him, and this was this training clinic that they were doing. Somebody asked him, "So, what's the difference between a horse and a mule?" And he said, "Well, a mule is just like a horse, only more so." And I went, "Wow, that is as good as description as you're going to hear." In other words, he meant if you have a good experience with a horse, you'll have a good experience with a mule, only more so.
awesome.
And if you get into a wreck with a horse, you'll get into a wreck with a mule, only more
Mm.
so, right? So the scale just gets broadened, I think, with mules. But they're one. I really
We
love them. They're
we see
wonderful.
them as lesser than in our culture, but
Yeah,
when you start
yeah,
reading his history, and
yeah,
I mean, even in the Bible, I was reading on some battles in the Old Testament, and the kings preferred riding on mules.
yeah,
Even then, and probably for all of the reasons that you're suggesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that
No, they're unique and they're special, and I really enjoy them. And they're just another complement to that equid species that are just wonderful.
So
So
is
it's
there like a standard? Because in my mind, when I think of crossing two species, and you have to do it every time, right? Because mules can't beget mules, right? You have to take a horse
right.
and a donkey every
Yeah,
single time. Um,
yeah.
is there a lot of variation, or is there kind of a standard? You want to use this breed of horse, and you want to use this breed of donkey to produce them. How does that work?
So in the packing world, it's a Heinz 57 of mules, right? Everything from giraffe cross mares to we had mules that were just tiny, and obviously were crossed on some smaller quarter horse, or even maybe some sort of a pony type mare. And so we had some small mules, and then we those mules that donkeys that were crossed on draft mares, you'd have big, sizable mules that could carry, several hundred pounds, and you had everything in between. And then, from a military perspective, at least in the U.S., a lot of their mules were either crossed on Morgans or thoroughbreds, so they had a pretty classic look, uniformity across some mules, all kind of dark brown, seal brown type color, pretty uniform, standard height. And from a military perspective, you'd expect that, right? Because all the equipment needed to be
Standard.
able to, yeah, interchangeable with whatever mule you're working with. But most guys in the packing industry, anyway, it's just a collection of mules, and they would cross a lot of those mules on drafts because draft horses generally had a much more mild
Hmm.
temperament than some of the warmer blood horses, quarter horse, thoroughbreds, etc. And you got a bigger sized animal that would carry more weight. So
Makes sense.
from those practical standpoints, last thing you want is a mule with an
Hmm.
attitude, because man, they they can kick you from an angle that you think is, well, you can't do that
Yeah.
physiologically, right? Your leg should not be able to bend in that fashion, and they still
Yeah.
get you. It's just
Yeah.
crazy.
And my brother had quarter horses, and he got scared, once he got thrown off of a couple as he got older. And so then I would come over and ride them because I was the crazy one. But now I'm at a stage in my life where I'm like, no thanks. I'd
Yeah,
prefer not to be
yeah,
thrown from 10 feet off the ground onto the ground by a horse. And we
yeah.
Thanks,
we
Blake.
have a nice horse culture here in Maine, and I'm sure the Amy's going to be showing you around with all of that. But it's a little bit different here in New England than it is in other places. The type of horses we run and what we do and how we compete with them. You want to talk a little bit about that, Amy?
Oh boy, I mean, we just got a message from someone coming tonight, and what was she breeding? Norman
Spanish Normans. Yeah,
Spanish Normans.
yeah.
I haven't had that one before. We come across a lot of quarter horses. We have a really good Morgan group here in Maine. Standard breds, retired thoroughbreds. Those are pretty much the most common you'll come across here.
Well, what do you guys have on the agenda while Dr. Randall's here?
So we are this evening. We are giving a seminar on feeding the performance horse, and that's at the Elks Lodge in Rockland. Tomorrow we have a number of farm calls in that area that we'll be making, and then tomorrow evening we will be at Blazing Star Stables in Monmouth, giving the same seminar. So same seminars, two kind of different spots in the state, so we can kind of get to everybody. And then he'll be traveling down to New Hampshire on Wednesday. So Blue Seal Feeds sponsors and feeds all of the horses at New England Equine Medical and Surgical Center. And they will be hosting us Wednesday evening for another performance horse nutrition seminar. And then he's off to
All
Vermont.
right.
So we like to drag him around about 12, 14 hours a day, 3, 4, 5 days straight, and then
Yeah.
send him home.
Yep. No food, just a little bit of water and a whoopie pie. That's it.
Just a little, yeah, whoopie pie. Well, we get Dr. Pepper. We make sure to
Yeah,
stop. Dr.
occasional
Pepper.
diet Dr. Pepper, and that's it. Yeah, it's good. These trips, I usually shed about 10 pounds by the time I get
Mostly
home.
we just
So
try to
it's
run him
yeah,
ragged.
Oh,
it's a good
that's
deal.
an interesting thing because with me, whenever I'm on a road trip, man, that's when I splurge and eat all
Yeah.
kinds of junk. Amy, what I'm going to show my ignorance here. What is the two-wheeled chariot racing that they do here in the state?
Standard bred
And
racing. It's called a bike or a sulky.
okay, and
But we do race in Bangor and Cumberland pretty much year round. We only take a couple months off. So there's a spring, summer, and winter series there. And we do the fair circuit. So there's 7, we might be down to 6 fairs during the summer that host standard bred racing.
and so is that I didn't really see that kind of racing until I moved to New England. Is that more unique to this region, or is it common elsewhere?
I believe, and don't quote me, because I read this a while ago, but I'm pretty sure the standard bred horse is born in Maine on a farm in Winthrop or Monmouth, I believe, is the origin of the standard bred
All
horse.
right. And they another thing that's unique about this race, see, I do know a little bit, is the way they train their horse, the gaits that they train their horses at, right? So they're kind of almost doing
Gauge
like
foot.
this paddle where the legs on the left side are working in sync and the legs on the okay.
Yes.
And
Yep.
how do they
They're,
accomplish that?
well, I mean, I have spent some time around the trainers, but I just know the horse either trots or paces. Dr. Rob might know.
Yeah, so you've got pacers, which the legs move in unison
Yes.
on one side and the other, and the trotters are diagonally moving together, right? And so
Yep.
genetics determines that naturally pace or naturally trot, and then they use harnesses that help them, like they'll connect the right front with the right hind, or if they're diagonal trotters, they'll connect diagonally to help keep them in unison.
Mhm.
So part of it's genetics, most of it's
Hmm.
genetics for them to maintain that gait, and then the other is just how they train them and go about it. And yeah, they're great horses too. They're just such great disposition, and standard bred racing is a very family oriented racing still, and those horses have tremendous hooves, just really thick hoof
Okay.
wall, and they have for what they do, and they race on surfaces that are really hard. Those tracks are unlike thoroughbreds. You see, they got about 4 to 6 inches of fluff. The standardbred surfaces are really hard surfaces for them to race
Mhm.
on. And then in the winter, I don't know if they do this here, Amy, in Maine, but in Norway and Sweden, they'll race on ice.
Yeah. We
They'll
don't do
put
that in Maine, but
yeah, they'll put steel caulks, spikes in their shoes, and they got steel spikes on the wheels of the sulky, and they're going around there on ice, just flying. And I'm thinking if I'm one of the drivers, man, I'm not coming off. Otherwise, you get trampled with spikes and wheels with spikes. It looked like something out of Gladiator, for God's
That's
sakes. It's
crazy.
just yeah, it's
That's
nuts.
I
crazy.
thought they were kidding the first time they told me they race on ice, but I looked it up on YouTube and they race on ice.
Yeah,
I see that
Mhm.
in Iceland with the Icelandic horses, they do racing
yeah,
there during the winter time as well. I've read it all. I know what they say. I know they say that the Icelandics can handle an adult man, over rough terrain. I just don't see it. I mean, man, it just seems to me like, that's horse abuse, to put a guy like me that's 230 pounds on a little horse like that and making it. But maybe Dr. Randall, maybe there's something I just don't understand about him.
it is physics, and they say they can handle an adult man, and I I'm sure I don't have the same composition as you, but I run about 220, and so you and me on one of those Icelandic fjord horses is. I'm pretty sure that horse is not going to get as far as if they had a guy that weighed 160 on him, right? I mean, it's just kind of physics, and so your
It would be
definition of
pretty
adult
funny to
man
see.
gets down to depending on size.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is amazing that a horse of any size can carry a person. And you look at some of these endurance race horses that travel 100 miles, and they're covering that ground, and the elite ones will cover that ground in 12 hours, carrying somebody on their back. I mean, it's yeah, they're another athlete that's just kind of amazing. It's what we ask them to do with our happy rear ends up there bouncing all
Mhm.
over the place. So yeah.
So with the gating, we actually have occasionally I'll see some pacers, sled dogs that'll pace.
Oh
It,
wow.
it's not really common, and generally, it's not desirable. But I think the reason why it's not desirable is because we don't have a whole field of mushing that's dedicated to pacing dogs. So and you
Sure.
want your dogs to be in sync with each other. Um, one thing I wish I had more time to do. When you train for distance, you train for the trot. You don't train for the lope. Because the trot is a more energy efficient run. So I train my dogs at around at around 10, 11 miles an hour. Obviously they can run 20 plus miles an hour, and they'd really love to. I was on live stream training my dogs Saturday, and I said, I'm just going to show you here what happens, when I let off the brake. And within 20 seconds, they were at full breakneck speed, going over 20 miles an hour, and I had to rein them back in again. But yeah, if I had another lifetime to do this, I am curious because, as you said, genetics, different dogs do different things. And one of the things that set my Seppala Siberians aside when they came over from Siberia, uh, you know, everyone called them the Siberian rats because they were so much smaller than the Alaskan dogs. But then, they weren't laughing, at the finish line because, these guys, were eating up the trails. And I don't know, because they didn't have cameras back then, I don't know if they were able to do those distances at a lope. And so I'm training my dogs at a trot because every distance racer trains their dogs at trots. But I'm curious
Yeah,
to know, with their size and with their build, what would happen if I spent a season training them at 16 miles an hour instead of training them at 10.
yeah, at a higher intensity. Yeah, that's a and again, if you look at just the pure physiology of it would say if you increase the intensity, you decrease the distance you can go at that intensity,
Mhm.
right? But those dang sled dogs are a freak of nature. So I don't know. I don't. No, this would be great. It's a great question for Mike Davis. Is where's that tipping point,
Mhm.
right? At what intensity can I go at and still maintain the distance? Now I'm at the peak intensity that I can travel at that given distance without now starting to drop off significantly before you get to that distance. I don't know. And another question that you prompted me just to think about, right? And I don't know the answer to this in horses either. Um, which gait ultimately gets to be more efficient from a distance, and the lope or the trot, but not only that, but the trot or the
Mhm.
pace. You got dogs that pace. Well, which one's ultimately more
Mhm.
efficient, that trot or the pace? I don't know, and I'm not sure there'd be a significant enough difference between the two that would allow you to say anything. But between the lope and the trot, for
Yeah.
sure. And from an endurance horse perspective, they'll trot, long trot for a lot of distances, but they'll also lope periodically too. And I'll never forget a world championships that I actually was the trail boss. I laid out the 100-mile trail, which was a great experience, kind of exhausting experience, but a great experience. And and the two winners of that race, when they got within a mile of the finish line, they just let those horses have their head, and those horses put their ears back, and they were at a full blown gallop for a mile across the finish line. And the riders jumped off, and those horses just stood there, took a couple of deep breaths, and then just went to
Mhm.
grazing. Like, okay, that was good. I'm like, Jesus, they just did 100 miles, and the last mile they were at a full
Yeah.
gallop. So, and that's when you think, well, they could have gone, who knew how much farther, but at much greater intensity throughout that 100
Right.
mile. And I don't know if you ever want to find out that point, right? Because you may find it out once with those dogs, and then you've just completely toasted
Yeah.
them. They're never
Well,
coming back
I,
from that.
I, I got to witness this firsthand, and Amy was there when I went to Alaska. Not only have I geeked out on, you were talking about Dr. Davis and his study, his 25 years of study on Iditarod dogs, but I got to spend a season with Mitch Seavey, three-time Iditarod champion, and his son Dallas Seavey, who is now a six-time Iditarod champion. So I got to see the practical app on the ground and do it. I was training and racing with their championship dogs, their first string dogs. So I got to see, from the nutrition, the making the food in the morning, the making the food in the evening, everything that went into it. And talking about pacing, he trains his team at 10 miles an hour. And I was in a 300-mile race, and At around 150 miles, I was like, "Hey, can I start letting off the brake?" And he said, "No." And we were the last checkpoint was in this 300-mile race was about, and every time I'd come in, he'd say, what the dogs look great. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Hey, can I start eating up some dog teams now? And he was like, nope, nope. And of course, my job was to prep these dogs for the Iditarod. My job wasn't to win the race, obviously, right? So I mean, I was in the back of the pack, um, and I think I was around 20th place or something like that. And at the last checkpoint, we were like 67, I think, 67 miles from the finish line, and he said, you can go out 3 hours, take a 2 hour break. He said, and then the last 35 miles, you can let off the brake. And I let off the brake that last 35 miles and ate up six teams in that last 35 miles. I moved up to 13th place. Yeah, it's amazing what these dogs are capable of. And, talking about all of Um, and of course, a lot of what I'm going to say is, not things I know. It's things that I've read, from studies. Unlike humans, and even unlike other horses, a human runs a 26-mile marathon, and you ask him when he crosses the finish line, "Are you ready to run 30 more marathons?" And he's gonna say, "No way," because he's already metabolized so much of his muscle. But these dogs, they're doing the equivalent of about 38 marathons, running about 100 miles a day. And the only way, from what I understand, that they can do that is they have something that the rest of us don't have. They have this metabolic switch that after that, that eats glycogen for only like the first 2 hours. And then after that first 2 hours, it flips a switch and it starts running on the fat in the bloodstream. And so, and I saw it with Mitch and our training cycles and everything. With him, it was closer to 3 hours. But what we would do is every 3 hours, we'd park and feed the dogs every 3 hours. And sometimes it was, you know, beef fat. It was salmon. Beef with high fat content, and we're snacking the dogs every 2.5 3 hours to keep that fat in their bloodstream. You know, they're burning. Some say 12,000, others say 15,000 calories a day. 12,000 calories a day,
Yeah.
and I don't know how many Big Macs I'd have to eat to to match that, but um, you know,
Don't find
yeah,
out.
and that's why a protein and fat in kibble like native dog food. That's why it's so important, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
The other thing, and I don't want to get too deep in the physiology here, Jonathan, but you know that glycogen fuel you mentioned, muscle sugar fuel that you mentioned earlier, and how they burn through that and don't really utilize that as they go. And the what is almost diametrically opposed here is they're burning fat fuel, even though you would assume they're at a high anaerobic rate. But at that trot, they're still maintaining an aerobic
Hmm.
system that allows them to burn that fat. But the other, and this would be another question. This is another conversation I need to have with Mike over what we refer to as brown see-throughs, just bourbon neat. And so they have this tremendous lactate uh, production, but then there's a process called gluconeogenesis, right? That you can take elements that um, aren't sugar or carbohydrate, but you turn them in. So it's primarily amino acids or lactate that you can take and turn in then to sugar. All right. So it's a different process than just eating sugar. You're eating other elements that have carbon in them, and gluconeogenesis in the body then allows you to make a sugar type element out of it. That's why if you eat enough, the higher protein diets tend to satisfy your carbohydrate drive, but doesn't generate a lot of fat. So I wonder on some of these dogs how big a role that whole gluconeogenesis process, does it operate at a different level than other animals, and I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
from what I understand from Mitch Seavey and Dallas Seavey, and from what little I've read on it, these dogs are actually capable. You know, in a thousand, we're talking a 1,000 mile race. They're actually capable if you're running a conservative schedule in that race and not trying to win, but just finish middle of the pack. It is possible for your dogs to cross the finish line in better condition than they
Yeah,
started the race in, which is just to run 1,000 miles in 14 days
yeah,
and to finish with better musculature than when you started. That's
yeah.
why they
That's
are by
crazy.
far the greatest athletes on the
Yeah,
planet.
they're just a freak of nature, right? It is amazing, absolutely amazing, and that's the fun. That's the challenging part, to be able to continue to develop products that help them do what they do. I mean, help them meet the physiology that they can deliver. That's a real
Yeah,
challenge, but that's the fun challenge,
yeah,
right? Both from a training and equipment, and from it's paw pad health, some elements that you don't think, but that's critical to sled
yeah,
dogs, right? Is maintain paw pad health, because they're, my gosh, they'd be wearing them down to the knee joint if they didn't have
yeah,
good paw pad health. So there's other elements like that that come into the equation too. The biomechanics of them helping to maintain stride length and support and those types of things that then helps them become more efficient at what they do. And when you're more efficient at doing that, then you're burning less energy to do it,
yeah.
right? So all those little things add up, and it's just they are just a fascinating creature. It's just amazing, absolutely amazing.
And that's again not to sound like an infomercial here, but that's why your work, doing the work you do with native dog food, that kind of research and work that you guys put into creating this dog food is so critical. I mean, uh, high protein, high fat content is it, from a meat based diet, which is what it has to be, is really hard to produce in a kibble, and it to have a good shelf life and that kind of thing. And you guys are finding a good balance with that. I find.
Yeah, I think we use meals, chicken meal or lamb meal or whatever other meal, beef meal, and that's important for people to understand that meal is not an inferior ingredient. It's a more preferred ingredient from a protein source. Companies have done a great job of marketing fresh chicken and fresh lamb. That's fine, but when you include fresh, when you say we're using fresh chicken, that means it's all the water content also, right? And it just infuriates me that regulatory allows you to determine your ingredient list by the ingredients that are going into the formula and not the
Rather than
finished
what it
formula.
is after it's been processed.
Yeah, what's actually in the bag? You
Mhm.
know, why wouldn't you want that as your actual ingredient list? That's what you're
Yeah,
feeding. But for whatever reason, I don't know how much money it took somebody, but for whatever reason, if you can use a fresh, which is 70%, 75% water, and you can list it first on the ingredient because it's the heaviest ingredient, and they list ingredients by weight in the formula, right? And so that's the heaviest ingredient when you have it as fresh with 75% water. Well, guess what happens to that water by the time it gets into a kibble in a bag?
it's
It's all dehydrated off.
gone.
It has to be to make a meal. So now you take that first position and move it to fifth or
Right.
sixth. So that's just, if there's one message that people that, if you're using a dry dog food, if you see fresh, whatever you pick the protein source as first ingredient, just move it to the fifth or sixth slot, and that'll give you a realistic expectation of where that really is on the
Yeah.
ingredient list. If you see chicken meal or lamb meal or beef meal, the first ingredient, that is truly the first
Yeah.
ingredient. So that's one thing. And then using natural antioxidants like vitamin E or vitamin C and special types of tocopherols that act as the preservatives as opposed to other
Right.
types of synthetic and mold inhibitors and stuff. So there's things that we can do using the Zinpro ProPath mineral package. hands down, in my opinion, Jonathan, that is just a superior technology for delivering minerals to where those animals really need it. And Zenpro, to my knowledge, is the only one that's done some in-depth research looking at this mineral technology that they're providing from an organic mineral base and what it actually does to paw pad health. I mean, they measured it statistically and hair coat, and you get 35% greater length of hair, 38% greater growth. You have a significantly greater paw pad health measured by ultrasound density, and you improve locomotion because of that. So they're the only ones out there that I'm aware of that has really invested in measuring what are the true effects of what we do nutritionally for
Yeah,
these
and
animals.
I know a lot of mushers that are using uh, dog kibble other than native are adding those vitamins and minerals that you're talking about
Yeah,
that have been infused into the native dog food itself.
yeah, yeah. We, you like it's complicated enough, particularly when you're on out on the trail, right? So it's good to make it simple. I'm all about making things simple. So I've I've got a question for you because you work at a high level, right, with these dogs, and and I've done horses all my life, and I spent some time with some folks that I consider maybe understood the horse better than anybody. Or on the back of the horse, there was no question that they could communicate with that animal better than and so I'd spend some time with those folks, and I'd go home and I go, yeah, I don't deserve to have. I'm going to sell them. I don't deserve to have. I'm not worthy. I'm a moron where I am right. Did you ever, when you see other people and working with dogs and understanding them, do you ever get to that point where you're going, I don't know that I deserve to work with an animal like this because I'm an idiot?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm there's a ridiculous saying, he that tooteth not his own horn, the same horn doth not get tooted. And uh, I'll tell you this story. Yeah, especially dogs, and I don't know so much about horses. Dogs are predators, horses are prey. So there is some hardwiring differences in their mentality, but um,
Yeah.
but there's a calm, assertive presence that dogs really, really respond well to. And so I think it was about 10 or 12 years ago, I got hired on as it was frustrating to the people who worked there because the day I showed up on the job site, I was made the kennel manager of a 160 dog tour business. That was doing big resorts in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and and the owner who had moved here from Alaska and had mushed dogs his whole life. He said, I want you all to see how. I don't know if you noticed how the dogs responded to Jonathan when Jonathan walked through the kennel, and he said, there are certain people, they have an energy that dogs respond right to, and there are certain people that they don't, and Jonathan just has that. And and the next day, I said to the group of there were 7 mushers there, and I said to them, I said, what Neil said I've got, Caleb, you've got. There was a guy named Caleb Husnig who was a horse wrangler from in his 20s, and he had done a couple of years as a horse wrangler out west, and then he came over to learn mushing. And because of his experience with horses, and probably just because of his personality and character, when he just walked through the kennel, the dogs, he wasn't aggressive, he wasn't over, but the dogs were just like, "Yep, he's in charge. Yep, he's the boss." You know what I mean? And with dogs especially, and I'm sure because horses are herd animals too. With dogs especially, they're pack animals, and they want the confidence of knowing you're in charge. They want the confidence of knowing you're the alpha male. When you really start to have problems is when these dogs are like, I don't really know if he's in charge. I don't really know if she knows what she's doing. And then they're like, Amy. and that's when they're like, ah, the alpha role here in this pack is vacant, so
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah,
take over, and that's when things
I
start
am
to get
not the
messy.
alpha when I mush. Those dogs, I swear to God, they turn around and look at me like, she's in charge. Okay,
yeah. You
but
know,
it's fun.
that's an interesting point. Interesting point you make about that these dogs want. They like structure. They like to know where it is everybody resides, and they like some guardrails up, right? And they feel better about knowing that. And if they don't have that, then it's just kind of a chaotic environment. Creates a lot of anxiety in amongst them. And I don't want to take this into territories that we don't. But children, I think, respond
You read my
similarly.
mind.
To yeah, they do. They want direction. They want guidance. They want guardrails. They want to know this is a line that you don't cross. And unfortunately, there's moments where there's children that don't have that
Right.
structure, and the results usually aren't particularly good. And horses too. You're right. They're more of the prey and not the predator, but they have a pecking order in the herd, right? That's always established. And whenever you take one out and put a different one in, it just all gets stirred up again until things get lined out. And so they too like to know that you know. And what's really interesting, they absolutely know when you do not know, and they know when you know. That there's just no question. And to your point, you can see it. You can see somebody walking in to put a halter on a horse, and you can see that horse will either just stand there and put their head toward them, and they'll put that, or they'll just go, okay, and they're chasing them around the pen, trying to
Yeah.
put a halter. It's fascinating the interaction that
It,
you can have with
it's kind of
different
like
types of
which
animals.
came first, the chicken or the egg. As you probably know, I've also got a degree in theology and have been an ordained minister since my early 20s. And I when I got kids, what do I do? I got books on how to properly child rear kids, and the best book that I ever saw was a guy who used to be Amish and wrote a book about child rearing. And the whole book was about taking how the Amish people train their horses and using it to train your kids. And it was the best book I had ever read on child rearing. And the whole idea is it's carrots and sticks. If you just go carrots, you're gonna have problems.
Yeah, yeah,
Eliminating negative reinforcement and just focusing on positive reinforcement does not work. And
yeah,
in the long run, you're doing your dogs a favor. In the long run, you're doing your horses a favor, and in the long run, you're doing your kids a favor. If right at the
yeah,
beginning they understand there's rewards for doing right and there are consequences for doing wrong, and because in the long term, it's safer for your dogs. Um, you know, um, I told the junior musher, he's Lakota Sioux, this 15-year-old young man who's training sled dogs with me now. I'm training him to be a musher, and I told him, if you have Druid or if you have Vodka, two of my leaders, if you have them out front when you come into the dog yard, they will lean into their harness and keep that dog line straight until you get every dog off the harness. But if you have others up there, they're going to be a challenge. And when they turn around to start socializing with the team, you've got to correct them. And that's hard for some people to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's they're again the same guy always had an interesting saying for horses that you want to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing
Hmm.
difficult. He says, but you can't make the wrong thing impossible. He says, especially with a 1,000-pound horse, right? Because if you think you're going to physically stop that horse from doing the wrong thing, you're going to lose that battle because they're 1,000 pounds and they're so much stronger and faster. But you can make it difficult and continue to make it difficult until, and this is the really important thing, and a lot of things people miss, that you notice the smallest change or the slightest try to want to do right, and then reward and support that,
Hmm.
right? Man, you better. you better be looking carefully for the slightest indication that, hey, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I'm looking to do something else. Oh yeah, that's good. That's right. And then reward and support that. But sometimes when you just make it impossible to make a mistake, man, you can have some nasty wrecks
That's
that
it.
way. But making the right thing easy, heck yeah, this is good stuff. And they'll gravitate to that. Most all species are lazy by nature, right? We appreciate the path of least resistance, although there's I like the physical challenges of things. So in addition to my horses and stuff, I'll go get lost in the wilderness areas for a few days and hope to come out on the other side usually. But it's not comfortable. But I think that's another element of humans anyway. We should push the levels of our comfort. We should be uncomfortable time to
Yeah.
time from that perspective. But as far as kids, yeah, man, trying to get them to make sure that they understand that the right thing's easy and the wrong thing's difficult, and that goes for all life. And so when you said this guy wrote the Amish book, his children, I was visioning kids running down alongside the roads of busy highways, just
Yeah.
I go, yeah, well, that's one training method.
I, something I want to say about that before I ask you this question. You know, there's a Bible passage: "Train up a child in the way it should go, and when it is old, it will not depart from it." And his point was, it doesn't say plead up a child or beg up a child. It also does not say beat up a child in the way it should
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah.
It's train
Right.
up a child. And the point that he was making was, is you have to set up when you're really doing training, like with a horse or with a dog,
Yeah,
you set up the training environment. You set up a training moment. It's intentional.
yeah,
What too many people do with their kids and what too many people do with their dogs is they wait till something goes wrong and then
yeah,
they respond to that rather than
yeah,
setting up training moments. And it's like I'm telling this junior musher, yes, every time we come out of the dog yard we're going to turn right and the dogs know it, but you still say G. and,
yeah,
and yes,
yeah,
most of the time we turn left here, but you still have to say haw. And I'm like, I did not hear you say haw. You're like, well, they were turning anyway. No, 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 no. It's that that association and building
yeah.
that understanding.
That example,
Yeah.
right? Or especially with kids, man, that you can say a lot of things, but if your example doesn't jive with what you're saying, they will pick up on that so
Yeah.
quickly, right? So kind of maintain that
Here's a
consistency
question.
and
Here's a question for both of you. Um, One thing I love about working with carnivores, whether it's birds of prey or sled dogs or whatever, they're natural predators. Their fight or flight is going to lean a little bit more toward fight than flight. Um, is Sled dogs, they love what they're doing. Um, it, if we take it, my junior musher put a harness on a dog and waited too long to put it on the line. And when he went to go get the dog, that $60 new harness was shredded on the ground. You hook the dogs up, and if you're not moving to get this team hooked up, they start grabbing the line in front of them and start chewing on it, and they're slamming into their harnesses. They're jumping up and down. In fact, to keep uh, my intensity level down, I've learned to just put some music in my ears so that they're amping themselves up and get me amped up so that I can still remain that calm, assertive presence while they're going insane. They're just going insane because they want to go. And I'll tell this little story, and then I want to ask this question. Um, Early in my mushing career, I went to the trailhead, and there was a New Hampshire car at the trailhead, and they were out skiing on the trail. And I hooked up my team and went out on the trail and met them. And I pulled the dog to the stop. This was about 25 years ago. Pulled the dog team to a stop, and they're looking over. No, it was Rhode Island they were from, and they're looking over my sled, and they go, "Where's your whip?" And I said, "My what?" And they said, "Where's your whip?" And I said, "We don't use whips." And they're like, "Well, how do you get them to go?" and and
There you
and
go.
just in this short period of time that I was talking to them, the team was lurching, and my brake was giving away on the ground, and I was moving forward by inch, while I'm talking to them. And they said, "Well, how do you get them to go?" I said, "You see my foot on that brake right there?" And they said, "Yes." I lifted my foot, and we just launched off down the trail. So I love that about sled dogs. Are there horses that really love to be saddled and ridden? Are there horses that love it the way that dogs love to pull a sled?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think with this caveat, depending on how it's presented to them, and and like so many creatures, ourselves included, they like to have a purpose or a job.
Mhm.
um, but you sure, again, I'll go back to who's presenting it to them, right? And the experience then of the going and doing the job or the riding or the training or whatever it might be. If it's consistently not a good experience, yeah, they're not there, and you can tell when they go to get saddled up, they're cranky, they don't get cinchy, or they're just kind of not wanting to cooperate, and just it's not a good experience for them, as opposed to others that you're saddling them up and they're going and doing a job, and they like to do their job. And obviously some are bred like sled dogs, thoroughbred racing horses, they want to get out there and they want to run, they want to
Yeah,
train, they just want to get out in open country and run.
Mhm.
um, I think that one of the classic examples is a story about the old milk horse when they used to pull a milk wagon, and the old milk horse got older, and the guy retired him. Excuse me. The guy retired him, got a new one, and went out for a few days and noticed that the old horse was very upset and nervous and pushing against the gate. And he finally figured out that that horse, that was his job. So he was getting too old to pull the wagon, so he just tied him to the back, and then he could go with him. And he was happy. He was happy to go out and do his job. And so I'm assuming it wouldn't be so different from dogs, that depending on who has them and how they're handled and treated, and if they make the act of what they're bred to do just horrific and not enjoyable, then yeah, not going to gravitate to it
yeah.
much. But, and don't get me wrong, there's some horses that by nature you know, they always they'll initially try to take the path of least resistance, right? Until you say no, that this is where you need to
'Cause
be. And
my experience growing up and riding horses in Western Tennessee and Mississippi is, most of the time you'd have those horses that when you went to cinch up the saddle would puff themselves up really big until you tighten the saddle, and then they'd deflate, and then the saddle would be loose. And I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
this horse does not want this saddle on it.
yeah, 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 yeah. There are those that have figured out ways to make their riding experience shorter rather than longer. Right? Yeah.
So, Amy, I'm going to pull you into this conversation. You are doing something this year for the first time you've never done before. You have been the uh,
PM.
sponsor of the Can-Am Crown 30, but you're actually running the Can-Am Crown 30 this
Mhm.
year, right? How do you feel about that?
Yes. I probably won't be first. I probably won't come in first place. I might be last place, but I just enjoy mushing. So this time, instead of riding down the chute and getting off at the end of the chute, I get to keep going. I don't know where it goes. I feel like there's people in the woods that will like, and I will go that way. I know how to. I know the basics of mushing. I can steer the dogs. I have mastered falling over and being dragged by the sled and not letting go. And I am able to upright myself without stopping now. So I'm feeling pretty confident about it, honestly.
Good.
I think it'll be a great
And are you?
opportunity.
Uh, what about the rivalry between you and your husband, because he's going to be racing too?
I mean, but just let him win. I mean, my God. let, let's let him go. I'm the one who's just smiling and talking to the dogs and having a grand time, and my husband has to like watch everyone and win.
Mhm.
So that's probably what's
So,
going to happen,
so when I
and I'm totally
help
fine with
set
it.
up your when I set up your teams, are you telling me I should give him the more competitive dogs and give you the leisurely dogs, or are you telling me that because he's competitive, you should get the competitive dogs?
Yeah, give him the leisurely ones. Give him a challenge. I mean, if he wins with the leisurely ones, then he really won.
Well,
And I'm pretty good with your dogs, so I'll know what you're
oh
doing.
yeah.
Like he has not a clue. He doesn't know their names. He can't remember. Like he'll just be
Well,
like,
you
"Oh,
have to
okay."
keep it.
Me, I
You have
know
to keep in
them.
mind he's going on this expedition with me, so that by the time he gets back, he will spend
He
about
might know them.
25 days with these dogs. So he's gonna know
He might get better.
he's gonna know them pretty well by then. Um,
Well, I may have to get back out here to watch
yeah.
this.
You know, if nothing else, it'll at least make for some good social media. It'll be some good marketing for the company that weekend, I guess.
So I haven't told anybody this, and Amy knows. I'm really flirting with the idea we're going to get back a week and a half before we're going to get back from the expedition a week and a half before the Can-Am. And that's plenty time for the 22 dogs, hopefully, that I'll be taking on this expedition. It's plenty of time for them to recuperate, to put some weight back on. So I'm really flirting with the idea of running the 250-mile race here at the Can-Am. And, if I don't, Amy and Jamie will have much better dogs on their team. But yeah, that's something. So yeah, it'd be great to have you out either way, and we can either you and I will be on the sidelines rooting for them, or I'll be out there an extra couple days. So Amy,
Yeah,
We can we can use dog
yeah,
handlers.
yeah. You need poop scoopers, I'm sure. So there
Oh
you
yeah,
go.
yeah.
I'm qualified.
the
I mostly just need someone to hold them for me.
You
Like,
have you have to you have to come out to the Bear Grease, I guess, in northern
oh yeah,
Minnesota.
that's a great race. Amy, I will warn you that like you get so used to someone being at the intersections to tell you which way to go, and it's clearly marked. There is one place in the Can-Am 30 that you're going to be running that I remember, and I ended up warning my sons about it. There's this spot where you're on a groomed snowmobile trail, and then the race
mhm.
trail just barely at like a 20-degree angle breaks off from this well groomed, well packed, well marked snowmobile trail, and if you're not paying attention, because there's nobody there, and if you're not paying attention,
Great.
I mean, it's so bad that like I was going to go the wrong
Um,
direction, and thank God there was a team in front of me that turned the right direction, and I started hitting my brake like, what the heck are they doing? The trail's right here, and I'm like, oh yeah, remember the musher meeting where they said to look for these little paw prints on the side of the trail. So do be advised, you can go the wrong
yeah. I only know how to turn the dogs around in a
way.
field or the lake.
Well,
I don't know what to do in the woods.
if they ask you for your passport, you've gone the wrong way.
I mean, that's at least a few miles. I would catch on to that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, and
You get out there and there's no other dogs, and you're thinking, "I'm winning. This is awesome!" Right?
If I get to escort station, I have messed up.
so Amy, I know that you work out, and I know that Jamie's pretty fit. But the other thing that I remember, I was pretty fit. I was the first time I ran the Can-Am. It's 20. Wow, this is 24 years ago. 2000. The year 2000 was the first time I ran the 30. And I had some adopted couch potato Siberian Husky pets that before that season they had spent 5 or 6 years sitting on someone's couches. And I, flipped through the Uncle Henry Swap and Sell magazine here in Maine, and I just started adopting Siberian Huskies. I didn't know any better. I mean, Disney says these are the dogs that run, and win races, so that's what I did. And I had never met a musher. had never seen a dog sled team. I just got some books online, started reading, started training these dogs. And then, I heard about this race with a $20,000 purse. And I was like, man, just like Iron Will in the Disney movie, I'm going to win $20,000. And they're like, well, you got to have 12 dogs for that race. And I was like, oh, I've only got 6 dogs. So I'll go win the 30, and I had never gone more than 15 or 20 miles with my dog sled team that winter. And I go to run a 30-mile race. And so there are some really steep hills. I mean, hills is an understatement. They're mountains. There are some really steep mountains in this race you're going to be running. And I am off. I'm just out of the Marine Corps. I am fit. And I am running up these hills beside my dog team. And I'm huffing and puffing and just pouring in sweat. And I was so slow that the first place team, and it's Mountain Ridge sled dog equipment here in Maine, was the musher, and I don't think he races too much now, but um, he comes up behind me on his 12-dog team, and he's standing on his runners, leaning back, and he was significantly older than me. He was probably in his 40s or 50s then. He looked old to me, so it was probably my age at the time. So he's just standing there, and he's coming by me, and I'm like, and he comes by, and he goes, crazy hills, huh? I was like, this is horrible. And he goes, why do you think I run the 12-dog races? And that was the day I had this big epiphany. I was like, I don't want to run 6-dog races anymore, especially at my size.
Well, I love to get off and run up the hill with them because I feel bad. And you tell me, don't feel bad, make them pull you up the hill. And I'm like, oh my God, it's terrible. I'm going to run with them.
That's the race day you can run with them. Just don't do it in training.
I'm supposed to make them lug me up the hill, and then I feel bad. And, they fake you out. They start running really slow, and you're like, okay, and you hop off, and you start, pedaling there. And then they kind of look back, and they're like, and they take off. They're fake you out.
So I'm gonna add to this. I'm gonna wrap up unless there's any fun stuff you guys want to talk about. I'm gonna add to the show notes the Kent Nutrition stuff on their equine work, and as well as the native dog food links. Anything you guys would like to cover before we get off here?
No,
Boy,
I think
we covered a lot, and I've really enjoyed it. A great visit. I look forward to meeting you face to face someday, Jonathan. That'd be great. Come out and watch you guys do your thing. That'd be awesome. Or if you're ever up in the Bear Grease running, let me know. And it's not too far from home, so that'd be
Sounds
great.
good. I'd really like to run that race. I am kind of Mitch Seavey, who the Iditarod 3-time Iditarod champion, and I were talking about the Bear Grease. There's a growing trend in distance racing of adding more and more rest time in the checkpoints, and the idea is, oh, we're being more humane, we're resting the dogs. But what it forces the teams to do is not adhere to the natural cycle of when the dogs need to run and rest, because guys like Mitch Seavey, they're going to take a lot of rests on the trail, between checkpoints. But you have to log so much time in the checkpoints, and the Bear Grease has just increased the number of time you have to do it in the checkpoints. So then what happens is it becomes a stage race in effect. You're running sprints from checkpoint to checkpoint, and then you're resting, this time in the checkpoint, and then you're running another sprint. So the really, really fast, short-coated, houndy dogs are
Yeah,
favored in that scenario, where
yeah,
if you've got someone who's really skilled like the Seabees in strategy, they know their dogs, and it's like, no, after 35 miles we're going to stop and rest these dogs. To hell with with the rest cycles that are on
yeah,
the race thing. So it is making it harder to run a strategic race when they add so much time to these mandatory checkpoint times. You're just running sprints
yeah.
from checkpoint to checkpoint.
Yeah, their intentions are honorable, but the results may not, because now it gets back to that distance versus
Yeah.
intensity thing. So you got dogs coming into a checkpoint that may be equally as exhausted as if you let them, spend a shorter period in the checkpoint time and allow them to manage it accordingly. And not only that, but the old adage about speed kills, right? So when you crank up the intensity of these athletes' speed, you're putting more stress and strain on ligaments, tendons,
Yes.
joints, muscle fiber, etc., as opposed to a less intense, longer duration. Higher intensity, short duration tends to lend itself more to injury than low intensity. There's repetitive type injury, but man, those that intensity type stuff can really cause more issues than you're. But I understand, they're
And
trying to guard for the welfare, but maybe you ought to put that in the hands of people that really love their
yes,
dogs, right?
and it's actually, you know, you said the intentions are good, and I do believe the intentions are good, but it's only the public perception, because what we
Exactly.
know as, people who train distance dogs is you need to give these mushers the flexibility to take that rest on the trails or to take it in
Yeah.
the checkpoint. Um, so, and I won't get into what my strategy is going to be for the Can-Am 250 this year, but yeah, it's frustrating. Actually, the only other 1,000-mile race other than the Iditarod is the Yukon Quest, which was actually much tougher than the Iditarod. Fewer checkpoints, more rigorous, more extreme cold temperatures. But because of outside pressure, they started dramatically increasing the mandatory time that you're in the checkpoints, and that's why that race just fell apart. And now you've got the Canadian Yukon Quest and you've got the U.S. Yukon Quest, and they're 300 to 500 miles long. There's not another 1,000-mile race anymore because they divorced, they split up over what we're talking about right now, and this perception of what's best for the dogs versus what's actually
Yeah.
best for the dogs.
Yeah, that's what drives me nuts is you have outside sources that know nothing about these dogs other than the dogs that are 20 or 30 pounds overweight that's lay on the couch at
Mhm.
home. They have no idea about the dogs or the people that care for them, right? And yet they're putting enough public pressure on to force people to make concessions to the perception. Well, I'm sorry, but you start making concessions to that
Yes.
perception, they're going to keep pressuring you right out of doing it because in their eyes, it's you're forcing these dogs to run, and it's cruel and unusual, and that's the in my opinion that ultimately gets to be the
You're
agenda for a
never
lot of
going to
people.
appease them. Rob Urbach, who is the new CEO, I say new, he's been on a few years now, the new CEO of the Iditarod. He came from the adventure racing industry, not from mushing, when he came in to be the CEO. And I understand where he's coming from. He wanted to extend an olive branch, to the animal rights organizations, and he wanted to have dialogue with them and communication with them when he came on. And again, his intentions were good, but he realized really quick that there will be no uh, appeasing them until there is no more races.
Right. No, no, they have an agenda. It's to stop any type of those sort of events, whether it's horse or dog or anything else, and that it's unfortunate. So
Yeah. Anything you want to close up with, Amy?
Well, I think we have a big winter ahead of us, or you do. I've been told that I'm going to come to Nome and see you arrive in Nome.
Yay!
Sounds like a big trip. And then we're gonna come home and we're gonna go right into Can-Am. So
Yeah.
I guess there's lots of things to stay tuned for and follow along online.
Yeah,
That's what we got going
maybe
on.
I can get you and my wife to fly to Nome to see us at the finish line, and then drive back with us so that you guys can be the dog handlers and Jamie and I can just recuperate in the cab of the truck.
Well, I was told that I have to bring the kids, so I guess we're flying. But I mean, I'm sure Tammy would
She'd
love
love
to drive back across Canada with
she'd
you.
love to pull poopy dogs. poop scooping out on the side of the road in 30 below zero temperatures. I'm sure she's game.
I feel like she's going to get on the plane with me and say, "I'll see you back
That's
home."
exactly what she's gonna do.
So do you take the Canadian route
We're gonna
all the way back home, or do you drop down to the
no,
States and go across?
uh, we're gonna cross here for a number of reasons. They're used to dog sled people crossing here all the time, and so we're not gonna get any flack from them. Hey, we're heading to Alaska. We've got sled dogs. It's fine. And then hopefully we'll have something similar to that because crossing the border with 22 dogs is not easy, especially when you've got 25 bags of native 4 in the truck, and
Yeah.
and you're dealing with other food. So yeah, we're gonna take the Trans Canada all the way across. Yeah, that's the plan.
Very good. Well,
I'd be happy to come and be a dog handler.
All right.
But, you guys are just doing that thing on your own. So
yeah.
I'm not really good with cold either. Don't forget.
Yeah.
me at -40 is horrifying.
And here you are jumping into mushing. What?
I can handle 30 miles in Fort Kent. Like I can buck up.
I was honest with Mitch Seavey when I went up there to train his team. I said, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you." I said, "We get down to -40 every once in a while in northern Maine. Once or twice,
once a
yeah,
winter.
once or twice a winter." And I said, "But if it drops colder than 20 below zero, I'm like, training can wait till tomorrow." Yeah.
The only thing I can look forward to is that I will have to run uphill. I will have to do cardio in the 30 miles. So I know that even if I'm cold in the beginning, I'll be fine by the end.
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys some coaching. I don't want you helping the dog for the first 20 miles, and then that last 10, you're going to be working your butt off. You're gonna be
Okay.
paddling on the flats. You're gonna be running up every hill. 10 miles. 10 miles of that is gonna have you plenty exhausted.
Well, I'm going to have to get up there between, like, I don't know, now and the time you leave for Alaska, and at least go a couple of times. I keep, nudging my husband,
Lord
like,
willing,
we're
if
going
there's
to have
snow.
to go up.
Yeah, if there's snow. Well, hey, God bless you guys. This has been awesome. I look forward to meeting you, Dr. Randall, and good luck keeping up with this crazy lady.
Yeah, I just accept it.
It's the best way you can survive it. Just accept.
Just accept it. Yeah, no, it's
All
great.
right.
That's great. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Hey,
Thank you,
thanks,
John.
guys. All
Thank
right.
you.
Have a good
All
one.
right.